I'm your host, Sean MacKenzie. Thank you for joining me once again on my channel on data engineering and data analytics. In this episode, we're returning to our data engineering playlist, and we're going to take a look at stored procedures, specifically on SQL Server, and how stored procedures can help you in your project by allowing you to sort of put a whole bunch of SQL statements together that run all at one time and give you the added benefit of being able to use input variables so that you can specify, some parameters and things like that. Now in this video, we're going to do a couple of examples. We're going to do a very simple example where we do a single SQL statement, and we're also going to do an example that has several SQL statements, and it's going to return the auto-generated ID key from that's generated during an insert operation. And that's of course a very, very handy operation that people need to do all the time when they're working with data. So without further ado, let's get to our stored procedures in SQL Server. Okay, so just to get started, I've grabbed some data, many thanks to the World Bank for some climate change data that I'm selecting here in SQL Server Management Studio. And I imported this into SQL Server a while ago, and I've used it for some other examples. And as you can see, it's a big table, and it has all different countries in it, and it has these different measures here for different factors that they've been measuring. So you can see there's Ukraine, and it's got 0.27 for foreign direct investment, there's different measures like cereal yields and amount of land that's under 5 meters from sea level. And so what we're going to do here is I'll clear the auto-generated query at the top there, and we're going to create a procedure. So what a procedure is it's a procedure just like in other kinds of programming languages. And we're going to create a procedure, and I'll just call it climate data for now, just so you get an idea of what it looks like. And then you'll say as, and then after you specify as, you can create a select statement, just like you would with a normal select statement. And in the simplest example, that's what we'll do here. We'll just say, select, maybe I'll do top 10 star from climate change data, and that will give us, the top 10 records from the whole thing. If I hit F5, you'll see that it completes successfully, and now we've got a procedure that has the top 10 records from that table. So in order to execute that, whether you're calling it from your ASP.NET application or from Access or whatever, you can just say execute and then the name of your stored procedure, and then it will execute that. So because the last command in the procedure was a select statement, what the stored procedure does is it returns the result set from that. So that's very, very handy, and so you can see there that's our last row, or pardon me, our last command, and that makes it very, very handy. So from there, one of the neat things that we can do is we can add some arguments to our procedure, and that's what we'll do here. So our argument variables, we put an @ sign in front of those, and so we're going to say, well, we want the climate change data, but we only want it for a particular country. So we're going to specify the data type of our input argument, and then we'll put in this case an nvarchar 100 characters, and then we'll change our query to have a where clause in it, where we also use the parameter. And so we can say where country name equals, and then our parameter, and then we can select that and go. And but first we need to drop our procedure, so we'll do that now. So because we created a procedure, we can't create the same procedure twice. So we're just going to go up above here, and we'll do a drop procedure, climate data, and we'll say if exists, in case it's not there, and then we'll say climate data, and then we'll hit go, and then we can press F5, and that's going to execute that. Select the rest of it, press F5, and that'll execute that to create the new procedure. And then in our exec statement, we can put our variable in just as you see there, and then highlight it and hit F5, and you can see now we've got the top 10 records from Canada of all of these different measures. And we could say the same thing for Ukraine, which I'll do here. And there's Ukraine for all of those same measures. You can see it's the top 10 records, so it's got all kinds of different measures in there and things like that. And that's a very, very handy way of using input variables so that you can get, you can change the output. So we could do the same thing with the series code as you see in the table below. We could do, we'll call our input variable series, and then we could say, and the series code is equal to, our @ series, which is in the input arguments there. So in order to run it, we also need to specify the series that we want. So I copied that just a second ago, and now we can run the whole thing. We can drop our procedure, can recreate it. You could run all those at the same time if you want, and then highlight the exec, and you can see now we get our Ukraine with just the series that we wanted, and the measures are in there. So that's basically an introduction to sort of like the most simple way of using a store procedure, which is to just have a select statement in there. Okay, and for our next example, we're going to use this car sales table that I've used in several episodes, and it has 26 rows in it right now, and we are going to insert some more rows into this table using a stored procedure. However, it's going to be a little more complicated because we're going to have a couple of different commands in our store procedure, and at the end of this we are going to return the sale ID, which is an auto number. If you're from some database like Access, they use the name auto number, and in SQL Server it's called an identity field, which auto increments by 1 every time a row is inserted. And what we want to do is we want to insert a row, and then we're going to return just the ID. And so a store procedure is perfect for that because it does it all in one shot, and it doesn't have any like the alternative ways of doing it is you might insert the row and then get the maximum record from the row, like the maximum sale ID. But if you have a whole bunch of inserts all happening at once, those could go out of order, and then you could have a problem. Whereas if you use a procedure, it will do the insert and return the ID that you want, and that's the way you want to do it. So in this case, we're going to have 4 arguments. We're going to say the car maker, the model, the price, the color, and we're going to insert into our cars table, our car sales table, and we're going to use each of these arguments as our field values, and that's going to be sort of like our first statement here. And so as you can see, we'll do insert into car sales, car maker, car model, car price, car color, and then we're going to just insert values and not a select statement. So we'll say maker, model, price, and color from our input variables, or our arguments, I should say. And I guess I spelled one color the Canadian way and one color the American way. And I guess everybody gets some color there. Moving on, we've got our colors in there. We've got our price, model, and maker, and that's a one insert statement. And so we could just we could tie that procedure off right there, and that could be a single insert, store procedure, which would be very handy when you're calling it from another application or from Access or whatever. You don't have to do all of that insert stuff. You can just call the insert car store procedure and give the variables to it or the arguments to it, and that's going to do it for you. And so it's very, very handy, especially if it's a really big insert statement. It's going to be really great. Now, in this case, it'll be a Ferrari Testarossa, and I have no idea how much a Testarossa costs. I'll just put $290,000, and then we'll put that one as a red car. And so we can select that whole statement and hit F5, and that'll insert that row into our table. So if I go now and I look at the car sales table, I should be able to see a Testarossa at the end of our table, and there we go. It's sale ID 29, and the 29 was auto-generated because that's an auto number or identity field, as you might call it. And so that's very, very handy. But when you're programming an application, or if you're doing some inserts and you actually need to have that ID in order to do something else, like maybe some other records that are dependent on it, well, you need a way to get that ID from the table when you do the insert, and that's where a store procedure comes in particularly handy. So what we can do is we can do our drop procedure just as we did there, and then that's going to drop that. I'll hit F5. So we're going to drop that procedure, and then we can go ahead and make some changes to our store procedure. Now, just to demonstrate sort of what you can do in a store procedure, I'll declare a variable, and in this case I'll just call it at ID, and then I'll set it as an integer, and you can specify the starting value as 0, and so that's going to create a new variable in our store procedure. So now we actually have a variable, and we can load that variable by in this case we can set our ID equal to the scope identity, which is going to return that newly generated identity number from our insert statement. So now we can capture that, and then we can just say something like select add ID, and now because it's the last select statement in there, now our store procedure inserts a row, it gets the ID, and then it does a select of that ID as the last item there. So it's going to do the same thing as our our Testarossa insert, but in this case it's going to return some valuable information, and I'll put in my other car here, the Huracan, and I'll put that as 250,000, and that's going to be yellow. So if I highlight that and I hit F5, you can see now it's returned a number. So that's very useful, especially if you're calling the store procedure from an application, or if you're using some C# or VB or whatever. That number is very, very handy because you can go ahead and do other inserts that might need that ID number. So now you can see there's 30 for the sale ID, our Lamborghini Huracan, and it's a yellow. It's yellow. And so what you could do is you could also put a nice column header on that. So you could say select ID as sale ID, select the whole thing, drop and restart it, and now if we hit F5 on that, we'll create another one. We'll make a red one, and now you can see it's got a nice column name there. Sale ID is 31, which is the latest generated sale ID from our operation. So as you can see, there's many statements in there. You could have a whole bunch of stuff in your store procedures. You could have, insert to one table and then insert some other rows into another table using that sale ID, so that you maintain your referential integrity and that type of stuff. This is very useful for doing orders and things like that, and order items in another table. You can do loops, rollbacks, and all kinds of stuff. And that is how you do store procedures in SQL Server. Hope you enjoyed today's discussion on store procedures in SQL Server. If you like what you saw today, please give the video a thumbs up. Make sure to subscribe to the channel if you have not subscribed yet, and click the bell when you see the bell, and put your questions and comments in the comment section below. Have a great day, have a safe day, and I'll catch you next time.